Have you ever wondered how ideas from the past can shed light on contemporary gender debates? Or how historical theories, even when problematic, can help us better understand the complexities of current social movements? In recent years, we have witnessed significant transformations in discourse about women's rights, gender equality, and social justice. The feminist movement, which historically fought for fundamental rights such as voting and education, today manifests itself in multiple currents, each with its own interpretations of how to achieve equity between genders. In this context of changes and heated debates, the need arises to critically examine different perspectives, including those considered controversial or outdated. One of these perspectives comes from Otto Weininger, an Austrian philosopher from the early 20th century, whose theories about gender and society, although widely rejected by the modern academic community, still echo in certain contemporary discourses. In his main work, Sex and Character, 1903, Weininger presented an extremely problematic view of differences between men and women, proposing theories that we now recognize as profoundly misogynistic and scientifically unfounded. However, the critical study of his ideas can help us understand how certain prejudices have perpetuated throughout history, and how some aspects of his arguments still appear, in modified form, in contemporary debates. This text proposes a critical analysis of Weininger's theories, examining how his ideas relate to current discussions about feminism, masculinity, and gender relations. It is not about validating his misogynistic perspectives, but rather understanding how certain patterns of thought about gender evolved and manifest today. We will explore these questions with academic rigor, recognizing both the historical importance and the profound problems of Weiningerian theories, while reflecting on how we can build more balanced and productive discussions about gender equality in contemporary society. Historical and biographical context. Who was Otto Weininger? Otto Weininger, 1880-1903, was an Austrian philosopher whose brief life was marked by controversial academic contributions and a tragic early end. Born in Vienna to a middle-class Jewish family, Weininger studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Vienna, where he developed the theories he later compiled in his main work. Sex and Character, Geschlecht und Charakter, was published in 1903, just months before Weininger's suicide at age 23. The work quickly became an editorial phenomenon, being translated into multiple languages and generating intense debates throughout Europe. Paradoxically, the book's success was accompanied by severe criticism from the intellectual community of the time. The historical context in which Weininger wrote is fundamental to understanding his ideas. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of great social transformations, with the emergence of the first organized feminist movements, changes in traditional family structures, and questioning of established gender roles. It was also an era marked by pseudoscientific theories about race and gender, which attempted to justify social hierarchies through supposed biological bases. Weininger developed an extreme dualistic theory, dividing humanity into two opposing principles, the masculine M and the feminine F. According to his perspective, the masculine principle would represent rationality, creativity, superior morality, and the capacity for spiritual transcendence. In contrast, the feminine principle would be characterized by irrationality, materialism, emotional instability, and incapacity for genuine moral development. It is crucial to emphasize that these theories had no real scientific basis and reflected the deeply rooted prejudices of the patriarchal society of the time. Weininger applied apparently philosophical methods to justify discriminatory views that we now recognize as fundamentally unjust and incorrect. Weininger's influence extended beyond his premature death, unfortunately inspiring some later thinkers, including figures associated with authoritarian ideologies. However, his work was also rejected by many contemporary and later intellectuals who recognize its methodological flaws and dangerous implications. For our analytical purpose, it is important to study Weininger, not to validate his conclusions, but to understand how certain forms of thinking about gender developed historically, and how some elements of his arguments still appear in modified forms in contemporary debates. Weininger's theories, a detailed critical analysis. Otto Weininger's theories about gender and character can be organized around several central propositions, all of them problematic from contemporary scientific and ethical viewpoints, but important to understand for purposes of historical and critical analysis. The theory of sexual types. Weininger proposed that each individual possesses a combination of masculine, M, and feminine, F principles, expressed through a mathematical formula. According to him, a complete man would be represented as M1, F0, while a complete woman would be F01, M0. This theory, although presented with scientific appearance, lacked any solid empirical basis. The Austrian philosopher argued that most people would be situated at intermediate points on this scale, thus explaining individual variations in behavior and personal characteristics. However, he consistently valued characteristics associated with the masculine principle, while devaluing those associated with the feminine. This pseudo-scientific approach completely ignored the real complexity of human development, cultural and social influences on personality formation, and individual differences that transcend any simple binary categorization. Criticisms of feminine rationality and morality. One of Weininger's most controversial propositions was his assertion that women would be incapable of true rationality and moral development. He argued that the feminine principle would be eternally linked to the material, instinctive, and sensorial, making spiritual transcendence impossible. According to Weininger, women did not possess true moral consciousness, acting only based on impulses and emotions. This perspective completely denied the intellectual and moral contributions of women throughout history and reflected the educational and social prejudices that limited women's opportunities at the time. It is fundamental to recognize that these assertions were not only factually incorrect, but also served to justify and perpetuate systems of oppression that denied women access to education, political participation, and professional development. Theories about sexuality and manipulation. Weininger developed complex theories about sexuality, arguing that women would use their sexuality as a tool of manipulation and control over men. According to his perspective, this would represent a form of feminine parasitism, where women would take advantage of sexual attraction to obtain benefits without genuinely contributing to society. These theories completely ignore the realities of power relations in patriarchal society, where women frequently possessed few resources beyond their position in family structures. What Weininger interpreted as manipulation can be more adequately understood as survival strategies in contexts of systematic limitation of opportunities. Anti-feminist positions. Weininger was explicitly critical of the emerging feminist movement of his era, arguing that efforts to educate women and expand their rights were fundamentally misguided. According to him, such efforts would attempt to force women to transcend their fundamental nature, which would be impossible and destructive. This position reflected a complete misunderstanding of the objectives of early feminism, which simply sought to guarantee women the same opportunities for intellectual, social, and political development available to men. Weininger's opposition to feminism was based on his unfounded theories about essential differences between genders. The context of historical feminism and its transformations. To adequately understand Weininger's criticisms and their relevance to contemporary debates, it is essential to examine the historical evolution of the feminist movement and its diverse manifestations over time. The waves of feminism. A historical perspective. The feminist movement is traditionally divided into waves, each with distinct characteristics and focuses. The first wave, which occurred mainly between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the period contemporary to Weininger, concentrated primarily on obtaining basic legal rights, especially the right to vote. First-wave feminists, such as Mary Wollstonecraft, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, argued that women possessed the same intellectual and moral capacity as men, and should therefore have access to the same educational and political opportunities. This movement represented a direct response to theories like those of Weininger, which denied women the capacity for intellectual and moral development. The second wave of feminism, which emerged in the 1960s and 1970s, expanded the focus to include workplace equality, reproductive rights, and broader criticisms of patriarchal structures in society. Figures like Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, and Simone de Beauvoir articulated sophisticated analyses of how limitations imposed on women were socially constructed, not biologically determined. The third wave, beginning in the 1990s, introduced more diverse and intersectional perspectives, recognizing that women's experiences vary significantly based on factors such as race, social class, sexual orientation, and cultural identity. This wave also began to question some assumptions of previous waves and to explore diversity within women's own experiences. Contemporary feminism, diversity and internal debates. Contemporary feminism, frequently referred to as the fourth wave, is characterized by its internal diversity and the use of digital technologies for organization and activism. This phase includes movements like Me Too, discussions about consent, debates about gender identity, and intersectionality issues. However, this diversity has also generated significant internal debates within the feminist movement. Different currents have distinct perspectives on issues such as sex work, motherhood, transgender identity, and strategies for achieving gender equality. Some currents of contemporary feminism emphasize the importance of recognizing and celebrating differences between men and women, while others focus on eliminating gender distinctions they consider socially constructed and potentially limiting. These internal differences generate productive debates, but can also create confusion about the movement's central objectives. Contemporary criticisms of feminism. It is important to recognize that the contemporary feminist movement faces criticisms from both conservative and progressive perspectives. Some conservative criticisms echo elements of historical objections from figures like Weininger, arguing that feminist efforts go against natural differences between genders. On the other hand, some progressive criticisms argue that certain currents of contemporary feminism may inadvertently reinforce gender stereotypes or fail to adequately address issues of intersectionality and diversity. Critics also point to cases where feminist activism may have created unintended consequences, such as situations where men feel unfairly attacked or where well-intentioned policies may have adverse effects in specific contexts. Analysis of contemporary gender dynamics. By examining contemporary gender relations through an analytical lens that includes, but does not endorse, historical perspectives like those of Weininger, we can identify several complex dynamics that merit careful consideration. Changes in power structures and their consequences. Recent decades have witnessed significant transformations in traditional power structures between men and women. Women have achieved growing representation in higher education, many professions, and some leadership positions. Simultaneously, we observe changes in social expectations about masculinity and femininity. These changes have brought substantial benefits, including greater diversity of perspectives in many fields and expanded opportunities for individuals of all genders. However, they have also generated tensions and uncertainties, particularly for those whose identities were strongly tied to traditional gender arrangements. Some men report feelings of confusion or alienation when faced with changing social expectations, while some women face pressures to balance professional aspirations with traditional expectations about family roles. These tensions do not validate Weininger's misogynistic theories, but suggest the need for more nuanced dialogues about how to navigate complex social changes, issues of communication, and misunderstandings between genders. An aspect frequently discussed in contemporary debates about gender are the supposed differences in communication between men and women. While we must reject overly simplistic generalizations, sociolinguistic research suggests there may be some average differences in communication styles, possibly influenced by differentiated socialization. These potential differences may contribute to misunderstandings in personal relationships and professional environments. However, it is crucial to recognize that any observed difference is largely the result of socialization and cultural learning, not fixed biological characteristics, as Weininger argued. The solution to such misunderstandings is not to accept hierarchies of value between different communication styles, but rather to develop greater awareness about communicative diversity and skills to navigate different interpersonal approaches. Challenges in applying gender equality policies. the implementation of policies intended to promote gender equality sometimes creates complex situations that require careful consideration. For example, affirmative action programs, while important for correcting historical imbalances, may occasionally generate perceptions of injustice among those who do not directly benefit. Similarly, changes in legal procedures related to sexual harassment accusations, while necessary to protect victims, also raise questions about due process and presumption of innocence. Navigating these challenges requires careful balance between different ethical and legal principles. These challenges do not suggest that efforts to promote gender equality are misguided, but rather that their implementation requires careful consideration of multiple perspectives and potential consequences. The question of masculinity and transformation. A particularly complex aspect of contemporary debates about gender involves changes in expectations and definitions of masculinity. Traditional concepts of masculinity, which emphasized characteristics such as dominance, emotional suppression, and competitive success, are being questioned and redefined. On one hand, this questioning can be liberating, allowing men to express a broader range of emotions and behaviors. On the other hand, some men report feelings of confusion about social expectations or concerns about how to express characteristics they value without being perceived as problematic. The response to these concerns is not to return to rigid and potentially harmful definitions of masculinity, but rather to develop more nuanced and inclusive understandings of how individuals of all genders can express different aspects of their personalities in healthy and respectful ways. Criteria for balanced evaluation of gender theories. Given the complexity of contemporary debates about gender and the persistence of some problematic ideas from the past, it is essential to develop clear criteria for evaluating different theories and perspectives about gender relations. Empirical foundation and scientific methodology. Any theory about differences or similarities between genders must be based on solid empirical evidence, obtained through rigorous scientific methodologies. This includes controlled studies, appropriate statistical analyses, and independent replication of results. Weininger's theories completely failed this criterion, being based on philosophical speculation and biased anecdotal observations. Contemporary theories about gender must be held to very high standards of evidence, particularly when making claims about essential differences between groups. Consideration of cultural and historical factors. Adequate theories about gender must recognize the extent to which observed behaviors and characteristics may be influenced by cultural, historical, and social factors, rather than assuming that observed differences reflect fixed biological characteristics. This does not mean completely denying the possibility of some biological differences between men and women, but rather recognizing that most observed behavioral and social differences are largely the result of socialization, cultural expectations, and social structures. Ethical principles of dignity and equality. Theories about gender must be evaluated not only in terms of their factual accuracy, but also in terms of their ethical implications. Theories that diminish the fundamental human dignity of any group, or that justify unequal treatment based on group characteristics, must be rejected regardless of other considerations. This principle is particularly important when evaluating historical theories like those of Weininger, which explicitly argue for the inferiority of one gender, even if such theories contained factually correct elements, which they do not. Their ethical implications would make them unacceptable as bases for social or political organization. Practical utility for improving human relations. Finally, theories about gender must be evaluated in terms of their ability to improve human relations and promote individual and social flourishing. Theories that increase conflict, perpetuate misunderstandings, or limit human potential should be viewed with skepticism, even if they contain elements of truth. The goal of understanding differences and similarities between genders should be to facilitate better cooperation, communication, and opportunities for all individuals to realize their potential regardless of their gender. Constructive directions for future gender debates. Based on the analysis of the limitations of historical perspectives like those of Weininger and the challenges faced by contemporary approaches, we can identify several promising directions for more constructive future debates about gender issues. Focus on evidence and nuance. Future debates about gender would benefit from greater focus on high-quality empirical evidence and recognition of nuance and complexity in human experiences. This means avoiding overly broad generalizations about any group based on gender, while still recognizing observable patterns when supported by solid evidence. Respectful dialogue between diverse perspectives. Promoting genuine dialogue between people with different perspectives on gender issues requires creating spaces where individuals can express concerns and experiences without being immediately labeled as discriminatory or delusional. This does not mean that all perspectives are equally valid, but rather that understanding underlying concerns can help develop more effective and inclusive solutions to gender-related challenges. Focus on common objectives. Despite differences in specific approaches, most people share basic goals of fair treatment, opportunities for personal development, and healthy and respectful interpersonal relationships. Emphasizing these common objectives can help build collaboration around practical solutions. Development of more sophisticated models of identity and relationships. Future debates would benefit from more sophisticated models that recognize the multiplicity of factors that influence individual identity and relational dynamics. This includes consideration of how factors such as individual personality, life experiences, cultural context, and personal preferences interact with aspects of gender identity. Lessons from history and paths to the future. The critical examination of Otto Weininger's theories and their relationship to contemporary debates about gender offers several important lessons for how we can approach these complex issues more constructively. First, the analysis of problematic historical perspectives like those of Weininger reminds us of the dangers of theories that diminish the dignity and potential of any human group. The consequences of such perspectives extended far beyond the academic domain, influencing policies and social attitudes that caused real suffering for countless individuals. Second, the study of the evolution of ideas about gender demonstrates both the significant progress that has been achieved and the continued need for vigilance against the resurgence of prejudices in new forms. While Weininger's explicitly misogynistic theories are widely rejected today, elements of categorical and hierarchical thinking about gender persist in various forms. Third, the complexity of contemporary debates about feminism and gender relations suggests the need for more nuanced approaches that recognize both the advances achieved and the remaining challenges. This requires resisting both nostalgia for traditional gender arrangements and uncritical acceptance of all contemporary changes. Finally, the analysis suggests that the most productive debates about gender are those that are based on solid evidence, respect the fundamental dignity of all individuals, and focus on practical solutions to real challenges faced by people of all genders. The path forward requires rejecting both the discriminatory theories of the past and contemporary approaches that may inadvertently perpetuate divisions or misunderstandings. Instead, we must seek more sophisticated and compassionate understandings of the complexities of human relationships and work collaboratively to create societies where all individuals can flourish, regardless of their gender. The history of ideas about gender, including the grave errors of figures like Weininger, teaches us that progress toward equality and mutual understanding is possible, but requires continuous effort, intellectual humility, and commitment to principles of justice and human dignity. It is this perspective that must guide our future efforts to understand and improve relations between genders in our society. Before you go, let me remind you of something simple, but that makes all the difference. If this video helped you in any way, hit the like button now. This shows YouTube that this content is worthwhile and helps me continue producing videos that really add value to your life. And of course, if you're not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. This way you won't miss the next videos, and you'll also help this knowledge reach more people. Deal? So leave your like, share with someone, and see you in the next reflection.